Now, I would say that most likely the entire first hour, you will be absolutely enthralled by the guest that I'm going to introduce here momentarily. His name is Dean Garner, and it's William Dean A. Garner. He's a former scientist, biophysics, marine biology, neurobiology. He's also a former U.S. Army Airborne Ranger, C Company 1st Ranger Battalion, a corporate mercenary with international private military firms. He designed and helped build, and a New York Times best-selling ghostwriter and editor of many books. He's also the senior editor of Adagio Press, a small indie publishing company that he founded, and it's home of the 69-minute novel and the 69-minute books. So Dean writes and speaks about the Reptilian-Jesuits Axis, the fascinating and deadly entity that controls our planet and what we, the people, can do to counter their machinations. In his spare time, he also paints what he says is mushy stuff. He terms tranquil impressionism, reads voraciously, travels the planet, and loves biking and hiking and being in the African bush. And right now, he is living in Cape Town, South Africa. He's going to be joining me to talk about the Jesuits, celestial physics, gold, and world domination. So, live from Cape Town, South Africa, I'm pleased to bring to you Mr. William Dean A. Garner. Mr. Garner, are you there?
Hey, Pete. Yes, I am. Thanks very much for having me.
Oh, thank you so much for making the time. I actually, as I told you, I caught one of your interviews. It was the first time I'd ever been introduced to you, and it was on Veritas Radio. And I think Veritas is still on the American Freedom Radio Network. But it was a very, very intriguing interview, and I wanted to introduce you to my audience because what you had to say, I believe, is very, very important.
Well, thank you. Yeah, let's thank Mel Fabregas for that because he was an excellent interviewer, and he was very, very passionate about that subject.
Well, I will tell you that I hope to maintain that same level of excellence as an interviewer. But I'm going to be very honest with you. I've been spending a lot of time going after the Zionists. And I've been trying to put my finger on the Zionists, including there was an organization called the Washington Institute. We found a lobbyist who was calling for false flag attacks. And I've been really on, I think, especially after listening to you, I've been on the wrong path of putting my finger on the individuals who I think have been the men behind the curtain. And after I listened to you, I'm questioning it.
Well, I appreciate that. I like to tell people that I'm certainly not a conspiracy theorist, as the bad guys who would label me as. I'm a conspiracy hypothesist. I'm very, very careful about what I say, about the research that I do, because I was trained as a scientist for 15 years in physics, mathematics, engineering, and I applied that to biology, so I was a biophysicist. Now, I always tell people, I was really a lousy scientist because I just couldn't play the game, and I hated being around these other nerdy scientists whom I just did not get along with. But I was technically excellent at what I did, and they respected me for that. And so I used that wonderful scientific method to generate thoughts, ideas, beliefs, and then do a little bit of studying, generate hypotheses about what I'm talking about, and do further study. And so I just want everyone to know that I'm very, very careful before I put any kind of word out there. I've done a lot of research over the past 32 years on who runs the world and how, and I've connected enough of the dots of circumstantial evidence to come up with what I, again, call the hypotheses that I do. Now, I know there are plenty of people out there who will say, Dean, those aren't hypotheses. Those are absolute facts. However, I'm not going to be the one to say that.
There you go. I was very, very fascinated by your background with the military and then how you transitioned from the military into mercenary work. Can you tell us a little bit about your background and history and what's brought you to Cape Town?
Yeah. Well, first, I grew up in Europe. My father was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot, flew the F-4 in Vietnam, and he also used to send me information on long-range reconnaissance and patrol Rangers with the 75th Rangers in Vietnam. So I was absolutely enamored by that. So around the age of 16, when I was in ninth grade, I mapped out a life plan that I'd be a scientist first because I wanted to study why my brain was so fucked up. And after that, I wanted
Dean, do me a favor. Just know that we're on AM radio, so we need to be really, really careful.
I apologize.
That's okay.
I mapped out that life plan in ninth grade. I was going to be a marine biologist and then a neurobiologist and then an Army Ranger. And then I wanted to do mercenary work because I had also read the book, The Dogs of War by Frederick Forsyth, and I was just completely enamored by the mercenary work. Nonetheless, so I had that life plan, and up until about the age of 48, I wrote it out for everything it's worth to a T, and I pretty much stuck to that. But I joined the U.S. Army at the age of 35, which is the time, as you know, Pete, that you sort of start thinking about, getting out of middle management and going into an executive ship, and or if not retiring. So I was hanging out with kids who were literally half my age, these kids right out of high school, the toughest kids in America, and had the time of my life. It was like going back to high school all over again at 35.
Wow. That's a fascinating story. And you went into boot camp at 35?
Yes.
I don't know if you know, I'm a former United States Marine, and I'll tell you what, my hat is off to you. I understand exactly what that means. At 35 years old.
Yeah, it was the best thing I ever did with my pants on.
That's funny. So you graduated from boot camp. You went on to Army Ranger School. Did you tour the world, or did you see any overseas duty stations? Where'd you go?
Yeah. We went into Central America and the few islands in the Caribbean. We were in Panama and Caribbean, Puerto Rico, and a few other places I won't mention. We were off the coast of Haiti in 1994 during Operation Uphold Democracy, which I look back on now as an absolute joke. However, I got to hang out with SEAL Team 6 because all those guys were my age. And so I'd work out with them, have long conversations with them because we were all aboard the USS America, an aircraft carrier at the time. So I had the time of my life, and I hung out with Delta Force operators, again, because they were the same age as I was. And these other Army Rangers, whom I was just getting to know, were 18, 19, 20 years old. And the only things we had in common were the uniform and being able to shoot straight and move well and communicate well. But so that was an excellent time for me to be there. And so then I was almost, how old was I? 40 years old when I got out. I got my honorable discharge. And the entire time I was thinking about how to do some mercenary work, overseas work, but it's not a typical or stereotypical mercenary type work. I used to rescue people out of hostile territories and take them to places of safe haven. And I also used to hunt down persons of interest. And I don't mind talking about that. I'm considered by some as a joke in the mercenary community simply because I do talk about it, because I'm not closed-mouthed. But I do want people to know, because I think it's important that they have some idea about my background, because it adds, I think, veracity and some authenticity to what I talk about. It shows about my experience. So I'm not afraid to talk about it without violating any operational security, of course.
Now, if you don't mind me asking, because I'm very intrigued by that side, not just intrigued, actually, I'm very, very disappointed in the amount of secrecy that takes place. That there's this entirely separate, I think, military that operates under the direction of the CIA, trafficking of drugs, seeking out those, quote unquote, as you call them, persons of interest, and how you actually pursue them. Under whose direction? Who's giving these orders to pursue persons of interest?
I can tell you.
Hello?
I can tell you.
Oh, you can't tell me. I'm sorry. I thought we broke up there. You can't tell me. So you're given orders from somewhere. You do your job. You do it diligently. You believe that you're doing the most patriotic thing you can do for your country, correct?
No, not for my country. My country is a corporation. The United States of America is a corporation. I did what I did as a U.S. Army Ranger, we the people.
Yeah, we're breaking up real bad. Daniel, you there? it at my side or at his side? Dean, can you hear me?
I can.
Okay. So you're working. I heard you say that you work directly for the U.S. corporation. That's the way you saw it when you were on. Let me ask you this next question. There was a time now, as a former United States Marine, as a former and admittedly a neocon, Fox News, brainwashed, red tie guy that's just trying to live in the Ponzi scheme and crawl my way on up to the top. There was a time where I was awakened to a lot of things in the world. Can you remember a time when you saw something and you said, you know what? This is not right. I can't believe that this is taking place. When did you actually start waking up to reality?
Yeah. When I was 2 years old. I grew up in Europe, in Germany and Italy, because my father was a U.S. Air Force fighter pilot. So I spent 12 years there in my formative years. And we used to go to the Eastern Bloc. So I toured all over Europe with my parents, especially my mother. And I saw the absolute injustice. There was a slit in the Berlin Wall in Checkpoint Charlie in Berlin, and I slid between the two large slabs in the wall, and I just got a peek over the other side, and I had eyeball to eyeball contact with a guard who just looked at me. He regarded me, and I regarded him, and I got the chill.
Ladies and gentlemen, I apologize for this breakup here. Dean, if you can hear me, you broke up. Actually, if you don't mind repeating your last name.
Are you there?
Yeah, we may need to reconnect here. But Daniel, if we can just do a quick reconnection, and I will reintroduce Dean Garner back to the show. But very, very intriguing guest that I have online, and we're going to be talking as soon as we do that reconnection. He actually he did a presentation that I caught a glimpse of in regards to the Jesuits, and was actually on Veritas Radio. Celestial physics, gold, and world domination. And he went through a broad range, including where we just started. And has he reconnected here? Dean, are you still there? Do I even have Daniel at the other end?
Yes, I am.
Oh, there you are. You're still there. Okay. So where were we? You were talking about Europe. That's what I heard, and then we broke up.
Yeah. Well, you had asked me, was there a time in my life when I actually sort of got an inkling about what I feel about today, about how the world is.
Yes, sir.
Run and who runs it. And again, I was when I was about just a few years old, and then actually it happened several different times, even up until I was about 10 years old. I was we went to Checkpoint Charlie and went into East Berlin, and I had actually crossed across the Berlin Wall in a small gap into East Germany, and I went eye to eyeball with a guard, an armed guard. He didn't point his weapon at me, but we just regarded each other. And when I stepped across the Berlin Wall, it was a tall slit, about 8 feet tall, and maybe a foot wide. I was frozen to the bone because it was devoid of humanity, and I asked myself, what type of person would allow this to happen? And fast forward to when I was in college at American University in Washington, D.C., I used to go to embassy parties, and in one particular one, some guy ran up to me when I was standing in the middle of a room, just kind of regarding everybody, figuring whom I was going to go chat up, and he said, "He'll be the death of us all." And I said, "Who?" And he said, "Brzezinski." So that's when I started studying about Dr. Zbigniew Brzezinski as a handler of Jimmy Carter and as a geopolitical strategist for the Jesuits, and what I term the Reptilian-Jesuits, but I won't get into the ET factor tonight. And so that's when I began my 32-year quest about who really runs the world and how. I spent 26 years doing it anecdotally, and by anecdotally I mean 1 hour every week dedicated.
Now,
there were a few times when I was in the Army. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. How old were you when you?
At that time, I was about. When I started, I was about 21.
21. Wow. So he'll be the death of us, and in, referring to Brzezinski, and then you were very fascinated by Brzezinski. Started doing your research on Brzezinski. In your opinion, who do you think Brzezinski is right now on the world stage? How powerful of a player is he?
Oh, I think he's probably one of the most powerful people under the leadership of the Jesuits. He is, I think, a brilliant geopolitical strategist. he captures the imagination, and because he has this very fascinating Eastern European chemistry that sort of chills people to the bone, and he's never at a loss for words. And except that only one time that I know of is when I actually phoned him after writing him a letter and told him, "Hey, this is William Dean A. Garner," and he was a sharp inspiration of breath. Didn't say anything. I said, "I'm going to be watching you."
Dean, stay right there. We're going to take a break. We come back. I'm going to talk more about Brzezinski. He's made some comments about Israel recently. Let's start off the next segment talking more about him. We'll be back right after this message. And ladies and gentlemen, we're back from the break, and I'm joined by the Honorable Dean Garner, and he's sharing with us his insight, his experience in the military as a mercenary on the private sector, and we just came away talking about the Mr. Zbigniew Brzezinski, who recently said, and I was sharing with Dean during the break, that I was kind of surprised by Brzezinski's comments, and he didn't even flinch at it because with me just awakening in front of our listenership, I'm learning many, many more things on a daily basis. But he is they call him a U.S. strategist, Zbigniew Brzezinski, and he rejected Israeli pressure to form American national security policy by beating the drum for war on Iran, and he said that we will not follow Israel like a stupid mule. But Dean, you have an interesting perspective as to, well, yes, he is powerful, but it's all smoke and mirrors and a charade, correct?
Yes, it is. And if you actually, first of all, I need to explain how I study what I do, because people are continually asking, hey, prove it, or how do you do this research that you do? And for one, there are only two ways to prove a conspiracy, as you know, Pete. One, either the conspirators, the whistleblowers, they come forward and they admit to the conspiracy. Or, number two, they have some brave soul like me, or perhaps an idiot like me, who gets out there and does research and connects the dots of circumstantial evidence to the point that you can make some sense of it, make a hypothesis, and maybe even generate some facts, and then you disseminate that to we the people. So those are the only two ways there. Now, so that's what I've been doing, connecting lots of dots of circumstantial evidence over the past 32 years, and especially over the past 6 years, very intensively. So about Brzezinski, he's not even on my radar anymore, because he's what I call part of the symptoms that sort of the public front face and the public voice of the true power, which is the Jesuits. Now, regardless of Brzezinski's comments, I can promise you that there will be some in the Middle East, and a big one. Brzezinski is simply trying to ease the probably fears of we the people, the good people all over the world, not just in America, by simply saying, well, maybe America should stand up to Israel. Well, the fact is, America and Israel are actually part of the same entity. They may, in the public face or in the public eye, they are viewed as being at odds with each other. But the fact is, they're run by the same entity, the Jesuits, and behind the black curtain, they are absolutely lovers and buddies, BFF, and whatever you may hear in the public eye, the public face, the public voice, especially on when it's disseminated by big media, mainstream media, I'd say that's all smoke and mirrors, like you said.
Do me a favor, would you please? There are a lot of people that are brand new to the show, brand new to the awakening per se. And when you say Jesuits, who are you referring? Can you describe very specifically who the Jesuits are, how powerful they are, especially over the United States of America?
Sure, and several great questions in there. Pete, you and I could spend an entire month talking about this. I'll try to condense 471 years of history into just about 60 seconds, because that's the sound bite, and that's all I get. They get 471 years, and I get 60 seconds. So here goes. Yeah. The Jesuits are actually sort of an offshoot. Go ahead.
Take your time. We don't have 471 years, but I want you to very carefully describe who the Jesuits are. It's very, very important. I believe this is an important answer, not just a good question.
Well, I'll try not to go back 2,000 years. However, there has been a power out of Rome, at least by the humans, the human element of the powers that be, out of Rome. And around the year 1000, there were the Knights Templar. I'm sorry, around 1200, the Knights Templar. And these were guarding the Temple of Solomon. And then after the Knights Templar had faded, sort of faded, at least from the public eye, that gave rise to the Society of Jesus, or the Jesuits. And the Society of Jesus is based in Rome, at the Curia in Rome, within a very, very important and secret, and not to mention secretive, part of Rome. They are not part of the Vatican. They rule the Vatican. The Society of Jesus is a military organization, and it's ruled by a superior general, or also known as the Black Pope. In fact, we have two Black Popes right now, Adolfo Nicholas and Hans Klovenbach, which is unprecedented in the history of the Jesuits. Now, the Jesuits, here's how I've studied the Jesuits. There have been probably many, many hundreds of books that have been written by them, by people, very, very brave people, many of whom were murdered by them. And curiously, all but maybe just a small handful of those books were suppressed and destroyed around the 1880s. And that's curiously when the House of Rothschild was ordered by the Jesuits to start buying up all magazines and newspapers and broadsheets and publishing companies. If people spend maybe like 3 or 4 hours, you could actually verify that very, very quickly. So it's curious. The Jesuits started suspending all information about them about that time, and it was also what I term the birth of big media back around the 1885 or so. So if you just look at the machinations of the Jesuits over, say, the past 10, 20 years, you don't see too much. And that's why I encourage people to look over many hundreds of years. Because when you actually study over 471 years their machinations, when you read hundreds of the books that have been published about them, only then, Pete, do you start to see these distinct patterns of behavior. They go into every single country. They take over the monarchy. They are the confessors to the monarchs and to the dukes and to the presidents and dictators, etc. The martinets. They control the governments. They've installed the central banks, which are private banks, in almost every single country on the planet. Just look at their patterns of behavior. They're tried and true. They repeat these cycles in every single country. And if it ain't broke, then don't fix it. If it works, then keep using it. Now, the Society of Jesus, again, is a military organization. They run every single military in the world, even though it may seem like, say, during the Cold War, we were at odds with Russia. Well, back behind the Black Curtain, the certain Russians at the very, very top and certain Americans at the very, very top were best of buddies, and they were just sitting back laughing and having shots of vodka together and smoking cigars. But the fact is, in the public eye, the public voice, the public face of, we actually see these countries at odds with each other, but it's all smoke and mirrors. And I like your term. Mm-hmm. And the Jesuits set it up this way. And it's a means of dividing and conquering, because the ultimate goal, and I'm probably getting ahead of myself here, is world control and paring down the population so that we can control. They can have develop a mono nation, what I term a mono nation, a single nation, one world government, etc. So that, in a nutshell, that's the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, a military organization. They are highly controlling. They've controlled America since its inception. And in fact, in the 1850s, actually 1830s, they were using Switzerland as a proving ground for what they would do in America. And fascinating subjects. I have an article about that, a short article on my blog, WilliamDeanAGarner.com. And if people start just doing as I do, you spend maybe 100 hours, Pete, and you can see many of the patterns of behavior that I've discovered and that I have disseminated to we the people. It's absolutely unmistakable. You would have to have your head in the sand, your head in a plastic bag, not breathing at all, being practically dead, not to be able to see this stuff. It is absolutely unmistakable, and I have no problem, even though I do say I'm a hypothesist, saying that it's the dirty, nasty, stinky, rotten, accurate truth.
You know what just and Dean, I'm going to tell you something. I'm going to be very, very honest with you. I've just now recently, over the past several years, including 9/11 truth and hearing about nanothermite back then, which I've now have discovered that's been a diversion itself. But recently, just within the past couple of years, I've been awakening to these things, and I was actually looking at and fingering and pointing at the Rothschilds, the Vaticans, the Bilderbergers, the Queen, and what you're saying is the Society in Jesus oversees all of them. They're basically they're pawns.
The Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, they are, and of course they have. But again, that's a whole different show, and I respectfully I don't want to get into that part. However, on the human element, the humans are controlling the world. The Society of Jesus, that hands down.
They control the entire world.
Exactly.
And the Rothschilds basically take orders from the Society of Jesus, correct?
They're just the accountants.
Wow, that's amazing. Now, in 1885, with the establishment of, you say that the big media was established around 1885. Obviously, we know how powerful the media is worldwide.
The big media.
The big media, yes. Now, I've also, especially
because
here,
that was when the Rothschilds again were the house.
The Rothschilds, you broke up. The Rothschilds did what?
They were directed by the Society of Jesus, the Jesuits, to start buying up all large or influential media houses like book publishing companies, newspaper companies, magazines, broadsheets, and so forth, and consolidating those. And if you actually look at the number of publishing companies, independent publishing companies, like say in the early 1800s, there were probably thousands across the world. And they were all consolidated into just a handful or a few hands around the mid-1880s or the late 1880s. It's a fascinating history lesson.
Now, Dean, I've always, and a lot of people, the majority of our population who is awakened, believes that the Zionists control the media here in the United States of America. Is that true? Where do they fall into the mix?
Again, they're part of the same, and they don't even show up on my radar because they are so insignificant to me. I concentrate on the Jesuits. The Jesuits are the one who give them their marching orders, and they were created. It's a fabrication of the Jesuits. So let me back just a bit. I have studied the machinations of what I call these minions, like the Bilderbergers, the so-called Zionists, the Zbigniew Brzezinskis of the world, Henry Kissingers, all those guys. I'm more fascinated by and spend my time dealing with the Jesuits and how they run, how they control, and what the machinations are. Because as I find out the patterns of behavior, then I can start picking. And if Sun Tzu were alive today, he would say something like, if you keep using the same method over and over and over hundreds of years, your adversary is gonna catch on to you, and he's gonna rise up and cut your head off.
Dean, you there?
Yes, I am.
I'm sorry. Can you repeat that last statement? You just totally broke up. I lost you. I apologize.
Okay, I said if Sun Tzu were alive today, if he were looking at the machinations of the Jesuits, he would say, if adversary starts catching on to these tried and true mentors, he's going to rise up and cut your head off.
Dean, we're gonna have to reconnect you real quick here at the break that's going to be coming up. I do have a big question that will likely lead into this next segment here, but it is a very, very common, conversation about the fact that certain alternative media individuals such as Alex Jones will not even approach the subject of talking about the Jesuits. And I'm just finding out about this higher level of authority about their military. Let's talk about their military first. What is the power of their military, and what is their power over the media, the alternative media in particular, like in Alex Jones, to where he won't even approach the issue?
Well, interesting you mentioned that, because I was approached by the man who runs GCN Network, or I don't know what it's called. he funds Alex Jones, or at least did 2 years ago when he approached me. He said, Dean, you're a lot more articulate than Jones, you're smarter, and you don't have the big ideas, or something to that effect. Because Jones is a used car salesman. And so he said, I want to give your own show. You can have a national show, and you'll be big in a couple of years. And then he said at the end, you can't talk about the Jesuits.
You can't talk about the Jesuits? And you're breaking up here, but yeah, I heard you say you can't talk about the Jesuits, and somebody from GCN told you that?
The head of GCN told me that.
Ted Anderson.
That's the man.
Yeah. Did you ask him why?
I didn't care. I just didn't talk to him again. I knew the answer. That's why that whole whitewash network is just information. It's BS. It's designed to mislead. That's why I call Alex Jones a traitor to.
I can't even hear.
Okay, that's why I call
really,
Alex Jones.
Daniel, can you hear me loud and clear? Hold on 1 second, Dean. Let's take care of this. We're gonna have to do this. Okay, so yeah, for some reason you are just coming in very, very choppy. I can barely even. We've got 30 seconds. We're going to go into a break here. Hopefully, we'll be able to get our technical difficulties with our connection to Cape Town, South Africa, all cleaned up. Yes, and let's go ahead with a reconnection here as we go through the break. But stand by, ladies and gentlemen. I'm with Dean Garner talking about the Jesuits. We've got a lot more to talk about when we come back from this break. Don't you dare go away. I'm P. Santilli. You're listening to the P. Santilli Show. That's right, we always do. We're back. Inciting a technical riot here on the P. Santilli Show. But I think we've got that taken care of, but I'm joined by Mr. Dean Garner, and he's joining us from South Africa. We had a little bit of technical difficulties as we were talking about something that I believe to be very, very important, and that was his experience with the Genesis Communications Network, and our listeners know our history with GCN and Alex Jones, but we always hear the term that Alex Jones will not talk about the Jesuits. I brought that up. If we can go back over your answer to that, Dean, I think it's important that everyone hears what your experience was with GCN.
Yeah, I was approached by the president and owner of GCN in 2010 because I had a blog back then, that's justplumdumb.com, and I was talking about what I at that time termed the first sphere of influence. Anyway, he contacted me and he said, look, I'd like to offer you a radio show. I think that you could be a lot better than Alex Jones. You're more articulate. You're not the loudmouth that he is. And then he said at the end, but you can't talk about the Jesuits.
And that was very disturbing, and you just pretty much just walked away.
Oh, I did. I just walked away. And curiously, though, fast forward to 2 years later, like about 6 months ago, I was approached by a gentleman who was one of my followers of that blog back then, Mr. Darren McBrain, and he said, look, we'd like to have you on Alex Jones' show. And then after several different conversations, he said, but you can't talk about the Jesuits.
Wow. So I just walked away from that. So the Jesuits themselves, they have their military, and I do want to talk about their military. And I don't know if you have personal firsthand experience with dealing with their military. Who is their military? Where are they? And why do they have so much influence over all the other? I mean, obviously they control the U.S. military, I assume, based on what you're telling me.
Yep. Well, they control every single military, and all the clandestine services within each of the governments, each of the countries all over the world.
Okay, so
CIA, Mossad, and you asked me if I had any firsthand contact. Well, first, when I said that they were military, they're built like a military organization, top down, just the same as say the U.S. Army or the Marine Corps. But the thing is, they themselves may not be soldiers or send out their own soldiers. However, they will use American soldiers, Israeli soldiers, or Venezuelan soldiers to do their dirty work for them. And it is the actual formal militaries in each of the countries that is the acting so-called military for the Jesuits. Now, the Jesuits, of course, control all the clandestine services, like the FBI or FBI type services within each of the countries and the governments worldwide. And you asked what kind of contact I've had. I've been to 100 different countries across the planet, and in just about every single one of those countries, I've seen 3 different entities: Chinese Secret Service, Israeli Mossad, and American CIA.
Mm-hmm. And you've worked directly with them. Obviously,
No.
Okay, go ahead.
Absolutely not.
Oh, you have not worked with them, but you've seen them, correct?
I've seen them.
Okay.
Yeah, these guys stand out like sore thumbs.
They do. So the Central Intelligence Agency, and here's how I'm going to transition here, because I'm going to go back to obviously we know they operate covertly. They have almost an entire economy operating behind the scenes, behind the public scenes. Now, the Central Intelligence Agency is very actively involved, as we know, trafficking heroin out of Afghanistan, cocaine up through South America. They just about control their own economy and have a significant impact on even our own currency here in the United States. Would you say that that's a fact?
I'd say that is probably 99.9% accurate.
Okay. And the reason why I bring up the fact that they're controlling our currency is because they're also laundering a lot of money through the big banks, correct?
Oh, yeah. Well, see, I'd like all your listeners to appreciate this. The 3 biggest money makers on the planet are guns, drugs, and sex. That is human trafficking. The arms trade is multi-billion-dollar a year industry. The drug trade is a multi-billion-dollar a year industry. It's probably into the trillions, actually all 3 together into the trillions. And of course, human trafficking, which is I've seen human traffickers in dozens of different countries that I've been in. However, I did not go off mission to do anything about that. But I did see them. I was around people where these young kids or young women were being held in hotels, and it was clear to me that they were victims of human trafficking. So anyway, we've got those 3 big money makers, and yes, Pete, you're absolutely right. CIA and Mossad, and there are other organizations out there within the umbrella of the CIA, like NGOs, these supposedly benevolent organizations that have easy access to children, to countries that have the drugs, poppies in Afghanistan. And I've been to Afghanistan 12 times, so I know firsthand. And also to countries like Bulgaria or Russia, where they manufacture these cheap AK-47s and the bullets and things like that. So it's not necessarily, say, the CIA proper, but some of the other little companies, and some of these are private companies or NGOs that are used to do exactly what you said.
Mm-hmm. Now, I obviously am assuming, I say obviously, nothing is obvious. I'm learning on a daily basis. They are involved or are capable of performing false flag acts such as 9/11. Wouldn't you say so?
Oh, absolutely. But those. I try to be careful when I talk about the CIA. For one, these guys are not simply one organization. It's a large umbrella organization. It's a large, very secretive and secret clandestine organization. They're involved in every type of clandestine activity, from killing Americans on American soil, from killing Americans on foreign soil, and which is exactly what the NDAA, the National Defense Authorization Act, was for. And so the CIA with their local assets, running drugs and running children for the various pedophiles in government, or just to sell kids. CIA to me is just a catch-all term, Pete, for a large organization that runs all the illegal activities that generates the largest amount of money illegally across the planet.
Absolutely. I would say that the Jesuits themselves, as a matter of fact, let me ask you this question. Who do you think committed the horrifying acts on 9/11, in your opinion?
Well, Jesuits.
The
Period.
Jesuits.
And now, again, you have to look at the top-down organization of the Jesuits. There was a guy at the top. And first of all, 9/11 was planned like 20, 30 years ago. And what we have to understand, too, is that the Jesuits sure, they have these short-term plans, their tactics, but they have 50-year plans, 100-year plans, 200-year plans. And even though one of their superior generals, or the Black Pope, and the minions underneath them, their soldiers, other Jesuits, may not be around to see it, even though they knew they may have been around at the inception, the information just keeps getting passed. So they pass on, they make up these continuity books that have the 50-year plan or 100-year plan, whatever, and they're placed in a continuity book, and those books are simply referred to by the next generation. And so, yeah, it was absolutely the Jesuits. So top-down organization, you got the Jesuits at the top. They control, say, CIA, Mossad, and other clandestine services. And so those guys, they also control local assets like maybe Irish Mafia, Italian Mafia, the Colombian Mafia. So there were many different, and of course they're controlling the entire U.S. military and every military around the world. So you can imagine they have every single asset in the world available to them to have committed these acts. And what's interesting too is that the Jesuits, when they commit these false flag attacks, some of them are so elaborate, like the sinking of the Titanic, which I could talk about for years, just to kill half a dozen guys, and to 9/11, just to make it seem like we need to go to war against the guys in the Middle East, whatever. However, to answer your question again, Pete, yes, the Jesuits committed this act. However, they used a lot of their military organization to plan it, because they had formal military planners. We had people who were silencing the certain members of the U.S. military, and a lot of people died over this that you don't hear about. Their wives were murdered along with the whistleblowers, or the whistleblowers were thrown into a whistleblower prison. I think one's in Indiana. So it's probably the world's largest conspiracy, and there are more than 1,000 conspiracies going on at any one time.
Dean, I have two very important topics I want to discuss with you, and I want to ask you if I can hold you over the top of the hour and bring you into the next segment. Would you be so kind as to join me for the next segment?
Oh, absolutely. And I think for the benefit of your readers too, Pete, we should probably discuss my latest book. It's Who Really Owns Your Gold? Yeah. The Intended Global Down of 2012-2014, because it's a 140-page book, very densely packed, but all modesty aside, a very well-written book and well-researched book with 10 pages of 100 different references. It's a great starting point, a point of departure for people, for all your listeners, to actually come up to speed with.
Yeah, I absolutely. I'm going to know more about who owns our gold, of course, when we come back in the next segment. I want to ask you the question about, why they would commit 9/11, how, in your opinion, in your research, they may have committed 9/11, and I also want to talk about what their intentions are with the destruction of the United States of America and their implementation of the New World Order. So let's talk about that when we come back over the top of the hour.
Sounds good.
All right, ladies and gentlemen, we're back. Over the top of the hour. I've actually been so intrigued by the conversation I'm having with Mr. Dean Garner, and it's William Dean A. Garner, and his website is as follows. I'll mention it here, and I'm going to keep him for one more segment. He's been kind enough to join us for this next 20-minute segment. His website is www.williamdean, D-E-A-N-A, his middle initial, and then Garner, Garner.com. And he also has a book, and the title of his blog is William Dean A. Garner on the Reptilian-Jesuits Axis. Now, reptilians is a completely separate topic of conversation that we're going to cover in a subsequent episode. I've invited Dean back to the show. We'll talk about those. He may touch on it before we depart here, but I do want to bring to your attention the book that he's published, Who Really Owns Your Gold? And I'm going to get a copy of that book myself, and I'd encourage you to take a look at that. Dean is, as I said, filled with a lot of knowledge, a lot of life experience, and has traveled the world, and I welcome you back, Dean. thank you very much for staying for the extended segment. One more bit of housekeeping. The bunker news break, which normally takes place at the top of the hour, is going to be pushed out to the next segment. So be sure to stay tuned for that. Occupy Corporatism will be joining me in the next segment. So, Dean, we were talking about 9/11. I'd love to just hear your opinion, no matter what it is, as to who you think committed the acts of 9/11, how you may have thought it was done, because we're all curious about that. But please share with us.
Well, first, 9/11, just like other false flag attacks, are planned many years in advance. Including all of the various laws that would be passed after creating that horrific problem, and the laws that are passed by, or that are ushered in by Congress. 9/11 was planned, I would imagine, probably like 25 or maybe even 30 years ago, if not even longer. And we have to understand, Pete and all listeners, that America, the United States of America, and all we the people, is the last bastion of liberty on the planet. And even though from its inception, the United States, the United Colonies, even though it was allowed to form and have we the people as part of as its citizenry, it has been controlled pretty much from its inception by the Jesuits. And it doesn't take too much reading, too much historical digging to figure this out and connect the dots, because people are, as I told you before, Pete, are always asking me, hey, prove it. And, you know, and just as an aside, I think it's hilarious sometimes, because when people listen to mass media, to mainstream media and big media, they don't question anything that the Glenn Becks or the Jesse Venturas or the Tom Brokaws or whoever the DJ or presenter du jour is. They just take it for granted. However, when some guy like me pops up out on the radar, and it challenges the status quo, they immediately say, who the F are you, and prove every single fact. And so it's somewhat of a sweet irony, because now I actually get to prove it and show people how to do research on their own. And that's why I published, for example, Who Really Owns Your Gold? Now, as for 9/11, it was a false flag attack, and there have been many false flag attacks. The false flag attack historically is designed to create a horrific problem, and we the people, of course, react to the problem typically by saying, hey, save us, protect us. And of course they're talking to their so-called government, and then the government comes back with some particular solution, which in which we the people always feel or sense that it is some form of safety. However, it's actually a form of oppression, a much greater oppression. It's a stripping of constitutional rights. And with each false flag attack, Americans lose little bits or big chunks of their constitutional rights. In fact, the NDAA and several other laws that have been recently passed, especially the Patriot Act, effectively erases the entire U.S. Constitution. Right. Completely. We do, to all intents and purposes, Pete, the Constitution doesn't even exist anymore. It's there on paper. And that is all. So we have no constitutional rights anymore. Or I should say, you Americans don't. I live in South Africa now because I took my advice in Who Really Owns Your Gold, and I left the country.
And that's the advice you give in that book?
I say get out. I say because now the reason why I came to South Africa, which is the most dangerous country in the world, more people are murdered here every day than anywhere in the world, is because South Africa calls to me, and my heart is right here. I feel like we've been soulmates for a million years, and so I belong here for some reason. And curiously, too, South Africa has the largest concentration of gold and diamonds anywhere on the planet. So I feel like I'm drawn here celestio-physically for some reason, Pete. And so I can't get into it now, but I advise people, try Costa Rica or Mexico, and try some other place, because America is falling apart very, very quickly. And it's even though it's a very slow process, or because it's a slow process, it is very difficult to watch. It just breaks my heart. Absolutely. It crushes me to see that. And it crushes me even more when I see that we, the people, are still watching MTV instead of turning to, say, alternative media sources or listening to folks like you, or reading like beforeitsnews.com. It breaks my heart that people are just sort of being boiled alive slowly.
That's absolutely true. My heartbreak is the only thing keeping me here. It's such a sad thing. I'm hoping, and I don't want to go off on a tangent here, but I'm hoping that my fellow Americans will decide to rise up. I'll stand beside them, but it doesn't look like they're going to. It looks like they're going to boil like frogs in the pot, and I think it may be time for me to leave, and I'm strongly considering that. So, anyways, let's switch to the subject as to how do you think 9/11 was committed? There's a lot of theories out there. Many years of research. There's been a lot of diversion. A lot of the nano thermite kooks talking about that 100 tons of explosives that were placed in that building that essentially would have blinded us if that 100 tons of nanothermite had blown up that building. But it wasn't blown up with nanothermite, in my opinion. It was justified. But how do you think 9/11 was committed?
Great question. And the thing is, even though I've talked with whistleblowers about it, that's not on my radar. I say that respectfully to you and to all the listeners who would like to know how it was done. To me, it's not important. The fact that it was done, and the fact that it took thousands of people to effect 9/11, and people who some whistleblowers who many of whom have been murdered or put in whistleblower prison or silenced or bought off, whatever. It's such an intricate act that to me, again, I say it respectfully, it doesn't matter how it was committed. The fact it was done and the fact that we've lost even more constitutional rights is what kills me. Now, if people want to know exactly how, well, for one thing, it probably was planned decades in advance. Now, of course, technology has changed over decades. But what's interesting is that the Jesuits have had even more advanced technology, so it probably didn't matter when they started planning it 30, maybe even 40 years ago, because they knew what the technology would be like in 30, 40 years, which was 9/11. Now, in planning it, they had to involve Israeli Mossad, they had to involve CIA, and again, the CIA to me is just a catch-all term for all clandestine service. And, of course, they had to involve even civilians who may be working for plant companies for the CIA or Mossad. There were thousands of people who had to be involved, and, of course, they were on a need-to-know basis. And there were no passengers in, let me just state some fact, there were no passengers or there were no hijackers in any of the planes. There were no hijackers. These were the supposed plane that crashed into the Pentagon was not a plane. The plane that supposedly or allegedly crashed into Shanksburg, Pennsylvania, there was no plane. And the coroner who was sent out there said he did not even find one drop of blood anywhere. So his duty on that day lasted exactly 20 minutes. So even though these facts are out there, and these are, again, the 100% dirty, rotten truth, even though these facts are out there, people still want to know more about the facts, and they're getting bogged down with the details. And I'm suggesting to all you folks, don't get bogged down in the details. Just try to focus on the absolute results of them and what has happened afterward. Your constitutional rights have been stripped away by the Patriot Act. You know, that act should have been written and passed over several years. However, it was written years in advance, and it was just thrown out there to the U.S. Congress.
Now,
and in no time.
And Dean, with all due respect, I think this is important, and you gave an excellent explanation. I do want to tell you that, and I know I'm putting you on the spot, but in a way, it's kind of allowing me as I just plow through the landscape of people that are divided on the evidence. There are those that are essentially expressing their opinion about how they think 9/11 took place, and they're diverting us away from the truth that you're trying to expose, that the true controllers of this planet, the Jesuits, okay, may, in fact, have access to not just armies, not just militaries, not just all the money, but they may also have access to some of the most powerful weaponry known on the face of the planet. And to divert our attention away from the fact that a very powerful force was used on 9/11 to cause that building to turn to dust. That's, I guess, what I was leading towards. You did give a great explanation, though. But I believe that how it took place will lead us to the Jesuits, don't you?
Well, like I said, if you connect enough circumstantial evidence in that vast constellation of dots out there, yes, you will instantly come up with the same conclusion that I have. Because I have shown other people how to do this research, and they have not necessarily used the same corroborating information for primary or secondary or tertiary source material. They come up with the same result or same conclusion over 100 hours of study. So you don't have to spend 32 years, 20% totally and 6 intensely to come up with. And that makes me look like an idiot. I think because you're all the time. I'm just saying, hey, you guys just spend 100 hours and you'll pick up.
You're not looking like an idiot. I'm looking like an idiot because of our technical difficulties with the connection now. I opened up Windows Explorer, and I think that might be my culprit here, causing this connection problem. But if we could just take a second here. You've been done an excellent job, Dean. I really, really appreciate your time. I want to transition now, and maybe we can conclude this segment. I want to find out from you as to what you believe. Now, obviously, they are destroying the United States of America economically by design. I assume to take the global bank, the New World Order, into full effect, to basically just be done with the United States that has built this global economy. But do you think that tell me your opinion on how the New World Order is coming about and how the destruction of the United States is necessary for that to happen?
Well, first, the New World Order is nothing new. It's been around for almost 300 years, and probably even longer than that. Even since its inception, the Jesuits have wanted to bring all countries together into one organization. They didn't call it New World Order then. So it's been around for 470 something years, if not even longer than that, because I like to study just a small segment of this history, which is 470 or so years on the Jesuits, the Society of Jesus. So I don't like going back and studying, say, the Knights Templar, even though I do it anecdotally. Now, the Jesuits themselves have had game plans. They use this, what I term celestiophysics, which is the physics of all the planetary bodies and our sun and our moon that influence the geophysical and biophysical events on Earth. Now, you're not going to find much information out there because I haven't written a book yet. And you can't trust NASA because that's full of a bunch of idiots. And
I agree with you there.
Yeah. See, it's celestial physics, not celestial physics. So celestial physics is one word. Anyway, so the Jesuits know about celestial physics. In fact, this is a fascinating. If you go back even like a couple of thousand years, the powers that be had suppressed the first science on Earth, which was astrology. And so, anyway, that could probably be an entirely different show. And forgive me, Pete, I think I went off on a tangent, and I can't even remember what your question was.
You know what? This is perfect. And by the way, that is a great reminder. I do want to mention to everyone, because they do have questions about your knowledge of, your opinion, your research you've done, and we want to have you back on the show to talk about the reptilians. Will you agree to do that? I'm putting you on the spot.
No, absolutely. In fact, let's just get this out of the way right now. The reptilians, to me, I use that term because it sounds kind of cool, but it's a catch-all term for all extraterrestrials, that the malevolent ones that have been controlling humans on Earth. There are benevolent reptilian or ETs, and there are malevolent or absolutely morally evil ETs, and those I term the reptilians.
I believe that. And that will be the topic of our next discussion, if you'll be so kind to come back on. Now, my question was in relation to the New World Order, how they're by design destroying the United States of America so that they can bring in this New World Order, the central government, central bank.
Let's do it. Let me give folks a history not a lesson, but a history assignment. Just go back and look at the events of the Weimar Republic in Germany in 1823. Almost the exact same things that happened back then, like 90 years ago, are happening right now. So when I told you that the Jesuits are using these same tried and true patterns of the same cycles in each of the countries. All you got to do is just go back and see what they did before to get a glimpse of what's going to happen now. And the idea is to crush America again because it's the last bastion of liberty, and they've been doing it very, very slowly over the past 271 years. But if you just go back and look at the collapse of the Weimar Republic, and you'll get a glimpse, because it ushered in Nazism, and if you look at the SS, the Schutzstaffel, the Gestapo, we have Homeland Security, we have TSA, and if you look at the laws that were passed back then, or the false flag attacks, like on the Weimar Republic, it was a parliamentary building. Forgive me if I got the term wrong. And then we see the false flag attacks here. You know, these eerie parallels, Pete. And like I said, just do a little bit of history.
Yep. Dean, thank you so much. You speak of we the people, and you say that term a lot. I've always believed that if 7 billion of us all woke up to what you're talking about, we could take control of these very evil Jesuits. Don't you agree? Thanks for joining me, Dean. We'll be back with the Bunker News Break right after this message.